Sorry about that, guys. Apparently my microphone quit working, so sorry about that interruption. Anyway, keeping on here, so now we're going to focus mostly on what's going on with the human respiratory system. And so we're going to look at the morphology, what they look like, and then kind of get into the anatomy of what these little guys look like on the inside and how we're able to exchange that gas with the atmosphere. And so for the respiratory system on a human, the lungs are the big hitters here. They're the main respiratory organs because this is where the gas exchange is occurring. So that's actually called the respiratory part of the respiratory system. And then getting the air in is also all that tube work and stuff to get the air down into your lungs. It's also considered part of the respiratory system, but it's called the conducting part of the respiratory system because it's not actually doing any gas exchange. It's just moving that air from the outside of your body to the inside so that way you can use it to respire. So here's your bronchial tree. You guys have all probably heard of bronchitis. That's when like these two big primary splits off of your trachea get inflamed, and so that's the primary bronchi right here. And so the trachea, which is your windpipe, you can feel that on the front of your throat. That's that kind of hard, bony tube running down the front. When it gets down into your lungs, it's going to split into two, and again, those are called the primary bronchi. They're going to split and keep splitting. They're going to keep splitting until they get into very, very tiny, itty-bitty little bronchi that will eventually terminate into an air sac called an alveoli. Alright, so the alveoli, again, this is the terminal part of the lung, and so this is actually where the gas exchange is going to be occurring. And so these little air sacs right here, they're surrounded by capillary beds, and those capillary beds are going to get the blood very, very, very close to these little air-filled sacs right here, so that way we can diffuse oxygen in and we can diffuse carbon dioxide out. Because remember, we want to get out all that carbon dioxide, that nasty byproduct that we used or that we made from cellular respiration, and we want to get that oxygen back in. And so these are what those air sacs look like. They look kind of like little clusters of grapes. Now, this is the actual respiratory part of the lung. This is where the gas exchange is actually occurring. This type of respiration here at the lung is called external respiration because you are actually changing, you're exchanging gaseous material with the external environment or with the air that's in your lungs. Technically, the stuff that's in your lungs right now is not really part of you, and so it's called external respiration. Now, when this oxygen-laden blood gets to your tissues, down in the bottoms of your toes or in your guts or wherever, and that blood is going to diffuse that oxygen and drop it off at the tissue level, that's called internal respiration because you're exchanging gaseous material with the blood to the tissues. And so again, external and internal respiration. Okay, so we already talked about this. Gas exchange occurs at the alveoli, so CO2 diffuses out, oxygen diffuses in. We're going to skip those clicker questions. Those are good things to study for tests, though. And then I always leave these mastering concepts in here because these are also good ways to study for an exam. Good questions. Okay, so how do we get the air into and out of your lungs? And so this is kind of an interesting thing. Breathing is not about sucking air into your lungs, it's about pressure changes. And so you've got this big muscle down here, this is called the diaphragm, that's big sheet of muscle that goes right up under your lungs. So what happens when you breathe in is you're pulling that muscle down, which is decreasing the pressure in your lungs. And so we're making a pressure gradient, basically. So now the pressure in your lungs is less than that on the outside of your lungs. And because of that, just like in osmosis and diffusion, the air is going to go to the place of lower concentration, if you will, or lower pressure. And so air is going to come rushing into your lungs. When you breathe out, the antithesis of that is that when you breathe out, you push up on that diaphragm, so you push in and up. That's going to increase the pressure in your lungs because you're basically squeezing the air inside of your lungs, and so the pressure is going to increase. That's going to cause the air to come rushing out of your lungs, and so that all has to do with pressure changes, low and high. and how to get air into and out of your lungs. So kind of interesting. Sorry, I had to have a little hot tea sip there. Alright, so like I said before, if you guys need to go back, you might have to read this a couple times because it's kind of an abstract concept the first few times you hear it, but just go back and read it. So when you are inhaling, you've got lower pressure in your lungs, because remember that in diffusion osmosis, ions want to go from an area of high concentration to low concentration. Same thing with pressure. So air is going to want to go from an area of high pressure to low pressure. And so when you're inhaling, you are lowering the pressure inside of your lungs so that way air comes rushing in. And when you exhale, you are increasing the pressure in your lungs by pushing on it, and that way air goes rushing out. So that's what we just talked about, exhaling. Okay, so your tidal volume, this is just a measure of how much air goes in and out of your lungs during rest. And so this is not during exercise, it's not during stress, this is just during rest, so normal working operations. Your vital capacity is the total amount of air that can be inhaled during your deepest possible breath. And so this is like if you're going to inhale right before you go under the water, you want to go and then go underwater, that's going to be your vital capacity. So that's how much can you stuff in there if you're really, really trying hard. Now this is going to change, that number is going to change based on age, based on the sex of the person, and based on health. So as you can imagine, a smoker who's been smoking for like 20 years is going to have a lower vital capacity than someone who's like an athlete and in their 20s or something like that. So that vital capacity is going to change based on who you are and how much exercise you get, all that kind of good stuff. So you guys have probably all seen a ventilator, like, or at least on your shows that you watch, like Grey's Anatomy or whatever kind of hospital drama show you're watching nowadays. But ventilators, basically, when somebody has had some issues, like if they've had a traumatic brain injury or if they're unable to breathe on their own, they create pressure changes that are necessary for someone to breathe. So that way, if someone is paralyzed or if they're in a coma or if their brain is just not working properly at the moment, you can keep them breathing and keep their body alive until their brain is ready to like come back and join the living. Okay, so this is just a review. So this is all of the summary of like going from the outside to the inside. So again, you contract your diaphragm in order to get air into your lungs, and so that's going to pull this sheet of muscle down and out, and that's going to lower the pressure in your lungs, and then you're going to have air come rushing in. And so the airflow from outside the body to the inside is first it's going to enter your nose or your mouth. So like you guys have all had a cold before and you have to breathe out of your mouth even though it's uncomfortable and it dries your tongue out, and then you're like, wow, I hate this. But you have a backup system for how to get air in just in case. But under normal working circumstances, you should be breathing through your nose because your nose helps to filter and humidify the air. It spends longer in your body before it makes it to your lungs, and so the air is warmed, it's humidified, and then it's filtered better if it goes through your nose rather than your mouth. But either way, like I said, you have a backup just in case. So from there, it's going to go down your trachea, which is your windpipe. It's going to go down the primary bronchi, all the way down to those little tiny itty-bitty bronchioles, and then to the alveolus. So then we have gas exchange there. You're going to relax your diaphragm, and then it's going to go up and in, and that's going to increase the pressure in your lungs, and the air is going to go out of your body. Oh, excuse me. Okay, so your blood cells, remember we talked about red blood cells being just a big bag of hemoglobin, basically. Their job is just to carry carry oxygen around your body and then pick up carbon dioxide. The way that they're able to do this is because they've got a heme group in the hemoglobin molecule, and so there's iron. I don't know if you guys can see that or not, but that little molecule right there is Fe, which is an iron molecule, and so iron is really attracted to oxygen, and so oxygen, when it diffuses in, is attracted and it'll just bond to that iron right there, and it makes iron oxide. For those of you that do not know what iron oxide is, that's rust, and rust is red, and that's why your blood is red. It's because you've got iron oxide inside of your blood here. And so when you get to an area where there's not as much oxygen, that oxygen is going to diffuse out, so into the tissues, and those iron molecules are going to let go of that oxygen and then drop it off to the tissues, drop it off to other cells that need it, and then that blood can recirculate back to the lungs and then become recharged. They can grab another oxygen. It's kind of cool. So we already kind of talked about the pathway of oxygen through the cardiac system. So remember that the left side of the heart pumps oxygenated blood from the lungs to the rest of the body, and then the right side of the heart is going to take that deoxygenated blood that's uncharged. They've dropped off all their oxygen, and they're going to take that to the lungs so they can recharge and reoxygenate themselves. And so that's called the pulmonary circuit. So carbon dioxide is going to diffuse out of the blood when it's picked up at the tissue level. When it gets up to the lungs, it's going to diffuse out of the blood, and so it's going to move in the opposite direction as oxygen. Remember that oxygen comes in at the lungs, and it's going to attach to those heme groups with the iron. The carbon dioxide is going to diffuse out at this point, and they're going to go out into the lung space, and then you can breathe that out. I wonder if I could increase the size here. Let me see here. Oh my gosh, I totally can. So let's do that here. Alright, so here's the transport of CO2. So if your blood gets too much carbon dioxide in it, like if you're holding your breath or you're just having trouble breathing, what happens here is you have a buffer system. Carbon dioxide acts like what's called a Lewis acid, and so it'll actually lower the pH of your blood if there's too much in there. And so your blood has a buffer system, and so this way, if you have too much CO2 in your blood, or if your blood pH is too high, on the opposite end of that, if you become alkalotic or acidotic because of these gases that are in your blood, you have these little bicarb ions in your blood that will either pick up extra hydrogens, which are the acid part, or they can jettison these little hydrogens. If your blood pH is too high, it'll jettison some of those hydrogen ions and bring the pH down. Or if your blood pH is too low, if it's too acidotic, these bicarbonate ions will grab up these hydrogen ions, and then that will raise the pH of your blood. So the pH of your blood needs to always be within, I think it's like 7.35 to 7.45 pH. Otherwise, you're in a world of hurt, and that's not a good thing. So that buffer system kind of helps to keep your blood within that range all the time, because you don't want to be acidotic or alkalotic. That can be fatal if it gets out of hand. So the CO2 transport is regulated by what's called negative feedback. We've talked about negative feedback before, and so what happens here is that if your blood pH is too low, so if you have a really high concentration of carbon dioxide in your blood, what that will do is trigger your brain to breathe harder. So you'll start maybe not hyperventilating, but you're going to start breathing harder to blow off more of that carbon dioxide, and that's going to raise your blood pH, which is a good thing in this instance. Clicker questions, woo woo woo. Oh, and that's the end of the PowerPoint. I thought we had a couple more here, but apparently not. Okay, well, go ahead and watch this. Make sure that if you have any questions, email me or talk to me in class, and I will see you guys next week.